Okay, so when I was just spending a bit of time thinking how I might share with you this evening, these words came to mind. I wrote them down here. There is, I believe, a wisdom that lives hidden in our feelings, intuition, imagination, and ancient memory. And it's to that wisdom I wish to speak this evening, because I think we abandoned wisdom quite some long time ago, maybe even as far back as the last talk that you heard, when I imagine this valley that we're talking about now is very, very different. If we go back to that period of history in the Iron Age, it's something like 90% or more of our homes, our roundhouses in this country, were built with their doorways facing the rising sun. I believe that said something about us as a people. And we may have different beliefs, religions or no religion, or different things of that kind, but it certainly says something, and so many archaeologists believe now, about the world view of those people. And that nature was looked at in awe, and reverence was a word not unfamiliar, if you like, in our vocabulary. We have a situation, let me share with you now. I'm 72. I'm 72 years old, and I remember more than half a century ago, 55 years ago, around our family dining table, a conversation about what we were doing to our earth, what we were doing to our woodlands, what we were doing to our rivers, what we were doing of our marshlands, everything. And this was more than half a century ago. My parents initiated this conversation, disturbing conversation, about how we had almost appeared to be turning our backs on nature. Every decade since that time, the situation has got worse. In spite of the multitude of programs that fill our screens, like Springwatch, on and on, all these different, like David Attenborough, all these other programs that speak to the beauty of nature, which are watched by so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, gone round the world it has, in spite of the fact that this is a nation famed for its love of wildlife and our dogs and cats and all the rest of it, in spite of the sort of lyrical romance of the story of our land and its beauty. We are now, as was revealed, I think it was last year, one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. Multiple species of our birds are flying towards extinction, or at least certainly not visiting our islands. All kinds of other forms of nature, wildlife, plant or animal, are besieged by our ambitions for this thing that we've come to know of as civilization, or our interpretation of what that means. Being the age I am, I do remember what it was like to be a child in the 1950s. I remember that we walked through swathes of wildlife all the time. We could visit any little patch of water. We would find sticklebacks and minnows and water boatmen, multitude, always the frogs and the toads and loads of spawn everywhere. It was all over. And a little bit of a cliche now, but it was true that when we drove in a car in the summer, our windscreens were covered in insects. And every now and then we even had to, as it were, stop the car and wipe them clean. even then, at that time, we didn't know it. We were already looking at a vastly depleted natural landscape. And that's the appalling thing for me that we have to confront at this time, or we are invited to confront. When I'm going back now to the 50s, myself and other children who grew up at a similar time thought was the norm of nature in this land was in fact a pale shadow of what it was half a century before that, which was itself a pale shadow of the nature that existed half a century before that, which was itself a pale shadow of the natural environment 50 years before that, and so on and so forth. It is hard for us to comprehend, but nature globally, and most certainly in Britain, is in free fall. Now we might say, does it matter too much? Well, I believe it's our own. I would say that ultimately the destiny, if you like, the future of our children, our children's children, and all of that sits in our hands. And that if we don't meet this and things go past a tipping point, then we will always be known of as the generations who allowed this appalling tragedy to unfold. So in part, I suppose, when I'm speaking to you today, it is an invitation to action. I think given the age I am, I feel comfortable saying, irrespective of your age, I would say that at this time we are invited to action. We are invited to do whatever we can within the sphere of influence we have, to do what we can to set this little fire going, which Simon Max and other colleagues and other agencies have created, the possibility of the regeneration of the River Stour, and the great gift this would be, not only to all the wildlife, but all the thousands and thousands of people that live in the vicinity. It's a big thing, a really big thing. When we sit in our homes, if we put COVID aside for the time being, let's say, and we go through our screens on our computers or phones or on the TV, or if we're, or a brochure that we've got from a tourist agency or whatever it is, and search for a place that we would like to go on holiday to, what do we look for? Well, the largest percentage of what we look for is beauty. We go to places that we consider within our terms are beautiful. We look for sunshine and water. And the hotels that we visit, if we go to hotels, we'll have pools and plants everywhere. There will be always this story of immersion to some extent or other, or very often this story of immersion in some way or another in nature. We go to these beautiful places, we search out these beautiful places, and in our ignorance, I suppose, very often we trash them. We take a beautiful bit of coastline, and if it wasn't for the National Trust here in this country, we'd smother it in hotels, private beaches, and everything else. And who would have access? We search these things, and yet we seem unwilling or unconscious of the fact that it is in our hands to create the environment within which we live, in which we could flourish and bathe in the beauty of this oh so lovely land, ourselves within our lifetimes and those that follow after. Now, if it's come to your mind that I might be, as it were, a fatalist in this story, that I believe that we will inevitably slide towards a bad ending with this. That is not the case. I've dedicated my life to doing everything I can to try to assist people to see anew what has been under our noses since all time, to realize that we need nature and that we thrive when we're in nature. Many of us, and I doubt you'd even be on this call really without it, go for walks in woodland, delight in following footpaths, go to places maybe on your holidays, wherever, treat yourself in different ways, or visiting this very same river and fishing or doing whatever it might be that you enjoy doing. This place, this valley, sits in the power of people like you and others who might be inspired to join. Its future sits in your hands. I was, I think it was mentioned in the brief, but I, as a young man, I had a profound sense that I'd never been taught what I wished to learn, that I'd survived our education system, but I hadn't thrived. And I went looking for people who would teach me about all the things that I really wanted to learn about. And it seemed to me that it was indigenous people who held that knowledge. People who still loved this earth and believed that nature was profoundly important. People who understood that for children to really thrive, grow strong, they need to be able to run and play and climb trees and swim in rivers or lakes and be outside and develop their confidence and their sense of profound connection with nature. And people who did not look upon nature only as a resource to be exploited for our benefit. People who did not consider themselves to be above nature, but understood that we are part of nature. So I went looking for those people, and I did indeed eventually find this small group of Native Americans who were willing to take me on and teach me. At one point, they began visiting me here in the UK. And that's how it went on for many years. I'd go over there for a month or three. I'd come back to the UK, and a few months later, some of them would come over here and visit me, and they would continue their mentorship of me. And on one of these occasions, they asked if they could go to the River Avon. They wanted to go to the River Avon because they wanted to pay their respects to a river that they'd heard about and seen pictures of. And they wanted to go and express their gratitude for the beauty that that river brings to our country. This is the way those people thought and how they feel and experience the world, I suppose. I very much wanted to accompany them, but I wasn't able to because it was my task that particular day to cook the evening meal. And there was quite a large number of people, so I gave them directions and all the rest of it, and they took off. When they came back at the end of the day, I asked them how it had gone. And one of them shared with me this story, which I want to share with you now. They arrived at this place somewhere along the River Avon, somewhere near Warwick, Stratford, that sort of area. And they found a place where you could get on a tourist boat and take a little journey up the river. And this delighted them because they thought we don't have to just look at it. We can get in a boat and we can actually go up the river. And so they paid their money and boarded the ship. And there was a whole, I don't know how many, but let's imagine something like 20, 30 tourists on the boat. And the engine gunned up and began to sort of slowly motor up the river. And then this guy who was driving the boat a rather grizzled, grumpy man, perhaps a little bit younger than I am now, began his commentary. And it went something like this. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for boarding our boat cruise now. So on the right, you will see a very large property over there. It was purchased by Rod Stewart in whenever it was, and was valued at £1.5 million. The property has recently passed hands and is now belongs to somebody else. And then chug on a bit further. On the left, you will see, coming as we come around the corner now, the Duke of Westminster purchased this property for a price of £4 million, and since then has undergone extensive renovation on the thing, and so it carried on. Every single bit of commentary was about the properties on the side of the river, and of course not ordinary people's homes, but the homes of the rich and famous. And at one point, this voice rang out across the boat towards this guy. It went something like this. Riverman, Riverman, why are you speaking of all these things that you have no sense of, couldn't care less about? Why are you speaking of all this rubbish that is of no interest to us? Why do you not speak about the river? We know that you love the river. I can see it in your heart. I see that you love this river, but you do not speak about it. Riverman, speak from your heart. At which point our rather grizzled, grumpy old guy steering the boat sort of sneers at the person who's called out and says, "Oh, thank you very much, our rather loud American friend, but I will give the commentary as I wish to give it." So returning as I was, coming up on the left, you will see another property that was bought recently, and this voice rang out again. Riverman, Riverman, don't betray yourself. Speak from your heart. I see you love this river. Why would you not speak about that which you love? At this point, our guy steering the boat began to try and speak another rejecting commentary. And again, the voice said, Riverman, Riverman, speak to us of what you love. And he started crying. He started crying. You can imagine all the other tourists had their heads buried in their laps, you know, kind of wishing they hadn't boarded this particular cruise, embarrassed, a little worried, wondering how things were going to work out. But this man started to weep. And he lifted up his gaze and he looked down the length of the boat towards his Native Americans. And he said, "It's true." He said, "I love this river. I've always loved this river. But I never thought anybody wanted to hear about that which I love. I could speak about the return of the fish that we've had, how the water quality was transformed at a certain time. I could speak about all the different species which have begun to see reappear. I could speak of my despair when, you know, different things happened that injured the river and hurt it. I do love this river. It means everything to me. And it means a great deal to me that you have challenged me to the point that I feel at this moment in time willing to speak truthfully of what matters to me. The remainder of that voyage, he spoke fluently, coherently, and lovingly the whole way along. Nothing to do with Rod Stewart's latest pad or the Duke of Westminster or anybody else's property. He spoke of the river. He spoke of the reeds and the flowers, of all the little animals that lived in the riverbank. He spoke of his longing that one day otters would again inhabit this river. He spoke and he spoke and he spoke, and the tourists, accompanying tourists, no longer had their head in their hands. Everybody was looking up, animated, reinvigorated, inspired, and moved by this man who had shifted from a rather tired, beaten down, diminished human being into a profoundly inspired, animated, vital older man. So I'm sharing this story with you, see, because I believe we have to ask ourselves some kind of similar question. What is it that we really care about? Many of us say that we care about our children. But to be very brutally frank with you, I would say that is not borne out by our actions. If we cared and loved for our children, we would be doing everything in our power to secure that future for them. We would not be the hosts of the worst collapse of biodiversity, etc., in our country ever. We would not stand by as all these really rather terrible things happen. If we'd never been activists ever in our lives before, we would at this point choose to become so. Not necessarily in the way that we think in a very conventional term of what an activist might look like, but simply a person like the riverman, who knows what he loves, understands that somehow this river has a value that cannot be counted in terms of pound notes, as it were. And that to be part of something that sees the river restored is in itself profoundly important and will be profoundly important for countless numbers of people who'll be able to witness and enjoy, families, all kinds of just ordinary people delighting in what will be created. Also, all those who own land and maybe the houses like the Rob Stewart type houses, or any of the farmers, all the others who have stewardship on larger pieces of land, knowing that they are farming and caring for the land in such a way that it is a restorative model and not an exploitative one. Even then, it's bigger than this, because the story of the regeneration and restoration of the River Stour Valley will then travel, and it will travel. It's a big piece of land, 30 odd kilometers long, and however many hectares, 5,000 was it, or something hectares of land encompassed. It's a very substantial story, and it will travel. People like me, but others also far more sort of well-known, will tell that story. Programs will be made of it, about it, which will go out on various media outlets, all kinds. Who knows who will pitch up to come and have a look at what has been done in your part of the world. And then, with a good wind behind us, maybe it'll start happening all over the country with different sections of land. Rivers are particularly something about a river I find so fundamentally appealing, because they're slender, they're graceful, they're fluent, they move, they're dynamic. and water in some way or other is always at the heart and the center of how life regenerates. It's some years now since Richard Louv wrote his seminary book, Last Child in the Woods. And that was, as I said, some time ago. And this is the situation where we're in, really. The excitement, though, the joyfulness that I think could be generated through this project is that all kinds of people who we might choose to call ordinary people could be involved, could participate, could be storytellers of the project, spreading it through the local communities, could be people who in some way inspire others, maybe even only one person at a time, but moving on and on. So the river, this project is not owned by Simon Max and his team. It's not owned by Natural England or any other organization that's behind it. It will ultimately be owned, and that could be sooner than later, by all the people who live somewhere in the vicinity of the river and decide that it is their river, not somebody else's river, that they feel a duty of kinship somehow towards telling the story of this river. It's a really pivotal time in our history. And I'm not sure that we really appreciate that. There's something so odd about what's going on at the moment. You know, we have something like fair trade food in our stores. Well, if a tiny percentage of the food available for sale in our stores is fair trade, what does that say about the rest of it? You know what I mean? If an advertising campaign can be built upon the theme that it's been naturally grown, what does that say about the rest of it? If we, even now today, we have buildings being thrown up all across the country, where the construction companies, the investors behind, do the absolute minimum just to get inside the regulations to allow those buildings to go up, when we all know that we need vastly more sustainable kind of housing that is really being built on eco principles that will enable it to be truly efficient. One architect said to me, "We build houses, but we don't build homes." He said, when that day comes, we'll know we've passed a corner. But we have to begin somewhere. We have to begin somewhere, and the ground under our feet is not a bad place to start. Our gardens. I wrote an article recently about the village I live in, and I have to say I really love this village. And the people in this village are friendly, you know, and it's a good place to live. It's probably one of the safest places to live in the British Isles. And this village is quite proud of its gardens. But if you take a closer look at those gardens, you will see that they are mercilessly controlled. The grass is cut so short that no wildflower dares poke its head above 1 inch high. There are no weeds on the ground because everybody makes sure that there are no weeds, and some of them use chemical means to do so. They grow very substantial vegetables and flowers and things, and you know that a good quantity of those gardens, they put on all kinds of chemical fertilizer, etc. The wildlife, which most people in this village love, has been going downhill for years now because there is no untidy place in these gardens. The whole place is just gradually, even amongst people that love and care for the countryside, they don't seem to realize that the way that they garden these little patches of earth which they love so much is destroying life. When we move out to the fields that lie beyond, it's even more intense. It's even more intense. It's an industrial model of farming. And there are so many reasons. I don't blame the farmers, I understand. Because it's inside a society that keeps demanding more for less, that measures things only in one form or other, which is always financial and economic. So somebody might say, well, we have to be a pragmatist. Well, I'm being a pragmatist, I believe. I would say real pragmatism means that we have to do something which at the very least is sustainable. Because sustainability doesn't talk about improving things, it talks only about maintaining it at its current rate, its current stage of degradation. But restorative farming, a way of restoring our gardens that invites nature back in and gardens sympathetically. But a project the size of which the Stour River Valley project speaks of is like a flag waving in the middle of a desert, really, saying this is what we could have back again, because it's not too late. Some of you might have seen, I can't remember, maybe I've got it on my phone, the name of the guy. I'm just going to check. It was on TV a short while ago. I'm looking it up now. Yes, Colin Stafford Johnson. I don't know if any of you have seen that on TV. It's a program called The Wild Gardener. So Colin was left an acre of land in the Wicklow Mountains in Southern Ireland. And it was the last little bit of land that his family had owned. They had a farm. His mother had just kept this 1 acre. And Colin has been filming nature around the world for a variety of nature programs for years. He's a BBC film cameraman. And every year he's realized that what he's filming is getting less and even more broken. And he asked the question, what can I do? And of course he realized, well, the one thing I really can do is go and have a look at this acre. And when I've had a look at it, I could restore it. And this short series, it's about what he did with that 1 acre. And honestly, it's mind-blowing. You really should look it up if you possibly can, if you like it. It's deeply inspiring and a profoundly loving, actually, piece of film, very softly presented. From a piece of land that looks very tired, unloved, and uncared for, he's produced a sort of something that is awash with color from all the wildflowers that are growing there now. A large pond that is just like an oasis of wildlife, and a little cabin which he's treated himself, from which he can sit and just allow all this beauty to wash around him. It's stunning. I really recommend it to you. Have a look at that and then ask, but what if it was 30 kilometers long? What if it was X thousand hectares of land occupied? What if thousands of people could actually enjoy this walking alongside a return of all kinds of bird species, all kinds of wildlife? What if our children could enjoy that as well? And children and children's children. I think you'd find it hard not to be a little bit inspired. So I think I'll come to a close in a moment. I'll be very, very willing and happy to receive any questions or comments. But I'm grateful to you for showing up this evening. And I'm really hoping that in some way or other, like the man who called out, River Man, speak of what you love. And the different ways that I've found to say there is a wisdom that lives hidden in our feelings, intuition, imagination, and ancient memory has found a home with you. And promise that I'm able to make on this program is I am going to visit that valley, and I would love to take a look. And I would love then again in a few years to return and be amazed, as I'm sure I will be, if it finds the energy and the traction to move the full course and actually happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you very much. So, as Mac said, if anyone has any comments or questions they'd like to share or ask, now's the opportunity to do so. You can either put your hand up and unmute yourself and ask, or you could type a message in the chat and I can read it out. It's up to you. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, just whilst people are, well, Martin, there's one coming from you, but maybe I'll just start. I think for me, what's really wonderful, just reflecting, Mac, is that for us, it feels like this sort of quite critical moment in the project as we start to move it forwards and ask these questions around governance and how might this project be run? How might we work together to achieve these aims? And what might those aims look like? And so I just feel like, yeah, I'm very grateful, Mac, for your, in a sense, your call to action. And I hope that some of the people who are on this call, who've come to the workshops and shown up, might find themselves at the governance workshops, and might find themselves taking on a role or a part, or, as you say, having conversations with your neighbors or your grandparents or your children, just to try to spread this story. So yeah, huge thanks there.
Very grateful. I think Alison has her hand waving, but she might be just operating her keyboard, I'm not sure.
Okay, I've got there's a Julia's got her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it, Julia. I think you have to unmute yourself there. There you go.
Sorry, it was saying that the host wasn't allowing people to unmute themselves, but yes, thank you. That was just wonderful and so inspiring. It's given me a lot of food for thought. I feel that I'm very much in a place at the minute around wanting to be more of an activist, more active, but sometimes I feel like I'm running around trying to tell everyone that the world's on fire and why aren't more people doing something, and I feel quite overwhelmed sometimes, and just wondered if you had any advice on how to keep going without totally overwhelming yourself and sort of burning yourself out, really.
Thank you, Julia. It's a great question, and one I've obviously had to meet myself personally, because for the last few decades I've been speaking and advocating and trying to do this work. For the way I put it, there is a lot happening in our world now, and there probably always has been, but the thing is, it's increasing exponentially. I think that could give us cause for grief and a sense that what could I possibly do myself faced with this tsunami of suffering. And I believe that whatever's happening now, you see, it's going to get an awful lot worse. As the whole climate change piece continues, if we carry on farming the way we are, if we carry on, in a sense, educating people in order just to fill jobs which people find boring, and if we don't meet the whole mental health crisis and all these different things, So I can understand when people feel overwhelmed by this. So I feel I don't want to cover my eyes or block my ears to that, because I think it's part of the truth of these times. But the other truth is that in a few short months, the next spring will start happening. And in May, the bluebells will come up again. And babies are being born. And the sun rises and the sun sets. And all the just phenomenal cascade of beauty that is part of our lives on this earth is always happening all around us. And for that, I love the way that the Iroquois Confederacy of the North America, tribes like the Onondaga, the Mohawk and others, where they say gratitude is a spiritual path. And when they speak about prayer, they say we never ask for anything in our prayers. We don't do that. Only once a year do we do that on the longest night and the shortest day. Every other one is an expression of gratitude and thanking for what we have. On that darkest day and longest night, we ask for something. And what we ask for is that the sun begins to climb in the sky again and bring us another spring. So I feel at these times like this, it is really important to be open and allow everything that is to be loved in this world to meet us, whilst at the same time not closing our ears and eyes to everything that is painful. That is a big challenge, but I think it's a way of being real, because so many of us are tempted to trying to ignore it and just live our own little life because we can't bear to look outside of it, or we develop belief systems and ways of living our lives that just shut the door on so much that is horrible. But many others shut the door on all the things that will forever continue to inspire human beings, if you like. So I would say, yes, spend time outdoors, go for your walks, revel and delight in all the things that you find lovely, and continue to do whatever you're doing, but be creative with it. So if something doesn't work, ask yourself, is it because I need to find a different creative way of doing it? Or maybe this is one of those situations where I just need to keep rolling this boulder up the hill, whatever it is, or if it's both. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thanks, mate. There's some activity in the chat, so I don't know if anyone actually wants to ask a question there. Please raise your hand. Or Martin, I don't know if you'd like to say a few words. Usually about the national. Would you like to? I can unmute you. Actually, I think I have to invite you to do so. I can do that. Oh, apologies. Okay, you should. There we go.
Yeah, that's what you really mean is you want to get me out the way while the sensible questions can come along afterwards.
Never.
No, it was just that thank you for the opportunity to listen and participate on an exercise like this. It's terrific. I was just drawing attention to the fact that you do a bit of research, and there are so many examples around the world of the adoption of natural health messages, natural health services, centers, parks, in Europe, in Asia, even in North America to some extent. And I just wondered what perspective there might be from taking a wider view. Is it a cultural thing with us? Is it something we're finding a challenge to grasp? Is the metaphor of the boat for the UK as a whole? You're maybe weren't speaking to the converted at some point in that exchange, in that story. So have we got any hope of a sort of greater push rather than what we might each individually do?
Thank you, Martin. I mean, maybe the honest answer is I don't really know. But what I would say is maybe it's difficult to change things when everything seems relatively comfortable. And I choose that word carefully because many of us in this country are not relatively comfortable, but certainly a very large percentage are, by which I mean my Native American mentors were appalled by the fact that I didn't really know what it meant to be thirsty. Okay. They said, my goodness, like, how can you possibly appreciate water if you've never been profoundly thirsty? Have you ever been hungry, Mac? And I thought, well, yes, I've been hungry. They said, no, you don't quite understand. We mean profoundly hungry. And I thought, well, no, I've always known that I could get food to eat if I wanted it. Have you ever been too hot or too cold? And of course, I have been too hot or too cold, but not in the way they meant. And they said, this is one of the disadvantages of a society that places such huge emphasis on comfort and convenience, that we build a wall between ourselves and nature and imagine that we are somehow separated from it. So I do wonder whether we need, as it were, and I'm not wishing for this, I hasten to add, but the impacts, I wonder how hard we will find it to change without real and serious impacts that wash up on our shores in the way that has recently happened in Kentucky and so in the States, the devastation that's been caused by the tornadoes there. Or the island states all around the world, which are pleading at COP26 for world leaders to take account of the fact that their land is going underwater, or the various other people. It seems to me that we find it very difficult to imagine things until they are so in our face that we have to deal with them. And then I think we usually do. And not everybody necessarily, but if we take a Second World War sort of picture of things, something like that hurls itself into us, then maybe we're able to rise to the occasion. And many, though not all, but many people then do their utmost to meet that challenge. I don't know. I really don't know. But I take heart from the fact that more now, this year, than ever I've known before, are topics like this being discussed. And indeed, projects are happening. You'll be aware perhaps of the, how many, 5,500 acre estate, the Knepp estate in Sussex, where they're rewilding their land, and how that has become iconic around Britain. You'll know perhaps of the many different rewilding projects that are taking place in Scotland. And then, of course, there are the rewilding efforts happening in Wales, which have gone badly wrong, some of them, because because the approach was so unsympathetic to the farmers families who've been farming that land for generations. A very different approach should have been made, which brought them on side in the first place, without telling a story that always puts them in the wrong and describes them as the villains of the piece. When that happens, then you get huge opposition, as there is. And then that takes another huge amount of time and effort to gradually dissolve. I love the thought. I think it was again Colin Stafford, did I say Johnson, on that program with 1 acre of Wicklow. He said, can you imagine the impact, what would happen if across the nation people agreed to start gardening in a different way? He said, we create a national park simply by doing that. In other words, all those millions of little gardens, many of them are joining each other, short distances, would have a massive impact. How do we do that? I'm not sure. Is it cultural? I'm not sure. Well, thankfully, the story's not finished yet, so maybe we'll find out soon enough.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions? There's one small one from Dee about, I don't know if she wants to ask. I invited you to unmute, Dee. You should be able to. There we go. Hello, Dee.
Hello.
Hello, Dee.
Hi. I loved your talk. It was very inspiring. I just was curious to know which Native American tribe had been mentoring you. And it's a shame we don't have such indigenous people left here that we can go to for help, isn't it?
It is, yes. Well, I've had the, I was going to say the pleasure, that doesn't quite describe it correctly, the massive challenge and occasional delight of being mentored by 2 different groups. One was a group that was just a mixture of people from different tribes who'd all gathered together and moved off the reservation where they got the money together and they were earning their livings as painters and writers and artists of different kinds. Because they found the reservations, which anyone will know who's visited Native American or First Nations reservations, I mean, they are a disaster continuing to unfold with terrifying rates of suicide, domestic violence, and all the rest of it. But these people had done this, so I learned from them. But the other is a wonderful grandmother Lakota woman called Loretta Afraid of Bear Cook. She gets very upset when she realizes that many people think that she was afraid of bears. She said, no, that was the name of the bear, afraid of. So Loretta Afraid of Bear Cook is an elder of the Lakota Nation and was one of the people who was a delegation that was meeting with Obama when he was president to try to get the return of the Black Hills to the Lakota Nation, which was taken from them many years ago. She's I think she is the, whatever it is, great, I don't know how many greats, granddaughter of Crazy Horse, who was an iconic Lakota warrior sometime or other. Anyway, lovely, delightful human being who has been to Devon on a few occasions, and I've met with her. Oh, and lastly, one other, which was, trying to remember, his name was John, but his surname's passed me by for the moment. He's Ojibwe. And I'll just give you this little story if you've got time, but he, when I met him, he revealed to me the fact that he was present when the first 2 wolves were returned to Yellowstone National Park in the States. So the wolves have been absent from Yellowstone for 70 years, okay? It's a big, big event. It took years of planning, negotiating, bringing people on side. And he was invited with an Ojibwe brother to sing the welcome home story to the song to the wolves when they left. It's a massive honor for him. So he said the pickup truck arrived on the chosen day, and there were all the Yellowstone Park rangers and people. Everybody's very excited. And the wolves were going to be released into the holding pen, which was, I don't know, 100 meters or so square, while they just acclimatized to their new location. Before then, they opened the gates and let them out free to free range. So the pickup truck arrives and the tailgate's opened, and the two Native American guys start beating their drum, and they begin to sing the way those kind of people do sing. I mean, it's a big sound. It's a raw sound. It's a wild sound. And the first wolf comes down the ramp and just hurtles into the darkness on the furthest side of the holding pen that he can get to, as far away from human beings as it can. By this time, the Native American guys are in full song, and everybody's just frozen still, watching, waiting for the second wolf. The second wolf walks very slowly down the ramp, and it's as close as if you were standing in your living room on one side, the wolf's on the other side. It's really close. And it watches with absolute focus the two Ojibwe who are singing. And then it slowly raises its head and begins to sing with them. It's a true story. And howls and howls and howls. The first time Yellowstone has heard the sound of wolf howls for 70 years. He said at this point, they were both, and the people amongst the rangers, tears streaming down their face, because they just couldn't quite, they didn't quite know why they were crying. They just knew it was one of those moments that just tore them wide open. And the wolf continued to sing with them for the full duration of their song. And then they stopped, and the wolf slid into the darkness, and everybody left. And the two Ojibwe were the last people to leave. And he said they looked at each other, and behind the wonder of this occurrence, both of them saw a shadow, as it were, in the eyes of the other. And he said, we both knew what we were thinking. We were thinking, once we too were part of this land, but nobody will sing us home. So if I can just put it this way, you know, with the Stour River Valley project, we think it's about bringing, and I've even talked in this way, of bringing nature back into our close proximity. In a greater truth, I think, is that nature is trying to sing us back into good relationship with life, because that's what nature is.